Hey everyone, it is Tim here, and thanks for traveling with me. I am in the Galápagos Islands, which is a bit of a dream destination because it is one of the most remote archipelagos on the earth. It is a group of islands off the coast of Ecuador, but it's 1.5 hours flight out into the Pacific Ocean. And it's most famous for its unique and sometimes bizarre wildlife. And I'm going to be spending the next few days traveling around this one of the islands that I'm on here. I'll give you a bit of an orientation of the place and then hopefully discovering some of the incredible wildlife which makes this place famous.
Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries. In this episode, I will be taking you to the incredible Galápagos Islands in Ecuador and showing you how I managed to do it on a budget. But first, we're going to pick up where I left off in the last episode, and that was the beautiful Ecuadorian Andes city of Cuenca. This beautiful, peaceful heritage city high up in the mountains. I had planned for Cuenca to be my introduction to Ecuador. However, on my first morning there, I woke up feeling very, very sick. And when I say sick, I mean like really, really sick. I felt like every part of my body was unwell. I had body aches and pains. I had a churning stomach. I had rushed trips to the toilet. I'd been vomiting. But then also I had tightness in my chest, pain all across my chest as well. My nose was stuffed up, I had a sore throat, I had a headache. Every part of my body felt like it was giving out and unwell. I had been traveling for about 7.5 months up to that point, and I'd been traveling all around Latin America, and I had been eating from the streets, and I'd never really had any problems up until then. So I think maybe it was starting to catch up with me, as well as that I had taken, I think it was 5 overnight buses in the space of about a month. So that was probably a factor as well. Whatever it was all just starting to catch up with me, and it all happened at once there in Cuenca. This was also the point at which I was starting to feel a bit tired of traveling. Sort of not so much homesick, that had hit me in Colombia in like month 2 or 3 of my journey, but this was more just like the novelty was really beginning to wear off. I have been told about like the 4-month hurdle before, where many travelers, it's in about their 4th month when sort of the novelty starts to wear off. And for me, on this trip at least, it seemed to be about the 7 to 8 month mark. I got myself into a taxi very early that morning. I'm pretty sure it was a Sunday morning, so the city was pretty quiet, and got myself to the Mount Sinai Hospital in Cuenca, which is, I think, meant to be the best medical facility in the city. So, you know, that's where the travel insurance came in handy. When I got there, they put me on an IV drip and got some antibiotics into me, and they said that they would treat my traveler's diarrhea, but that they couldn't really do anything about the respiratory problem because that wasn't an emergency. And I mean, that was fair enough, and maybe I didn't even need to be in hospital at all, but I certainly felt bad enough for that. I mean, I felt like I couldn't move that morning. It was so bad. After a couple of hours at the hospital, I went back to the hostel, which was the Posada Todos Santos, where the very kind host looked after me with plain rice, yogurt, bread, bottled water, all the bland kinds of food that your stomach needs when it feels like it's giving up on life. The next day I went to another doctor, and she was very kind. She was actually a pediatrician, but she agreed to see me because there were no other doctors available in the medical center at that time. She was looking at my respiratory system, and she put me on an even stronger but broader spectrum antibiotic to try and get rid of whatever was bringing me down in both the chest and the stomach. So unfortunately, my experience of Cuenca ended up being really just sort of naps and convalescing at the hostel and making trips to pharmacies and supermarkets to get bland food, and very gentle walks whenever I felt like I couldn't stay in that room anymore, and walks to a local Chinese restaurant which served just plain boiled rice, which was exactly what I needed at that time. It seemed like a really lovely city, and I do wish that I'd been able to appreciate it more. But I felt weak. Like I don't think I've ever felt quite so weakened by illness as I did at that moment. I mean, there have been times when I've been really dramatically sick, you know, in India and Pakistan, for example, but I don't think I've ever sort of had that feeling that even when the symptoms were starting to subside, I just felt like I had been hit by a bus. I was drained. Whatever I had come down with, or whatever several things I had come down with, it completely decimated my body, and I wasn't okay for quite a while after that, actually, as you will see in my upcoming vlogs. I was also slightly concerned because one of the flights that I had booked was a flight to the Galapagos Islands from the city of Guayaquil, which is a couple of hours drive from Cuenca. Cancelling the trip to the Galapagos wasn't really on my menu, so I knew that I would need to get well enough to get on a bus and sit there on the bus and without toilet access to get to Guayaquil, and then from there get onto a flight of I think it was about 2 hours to fly out to the Galapagos Islands. So, you know, sort of I needed to get myself well enough to do that. I loaded myself up with all the medications that I needed, and then I boarded the bus and I made it. Getting on that bus and getting all the way to Guayaquil and being okay-ish, it felt like such an achievement. Eventually, I arrived in Guayaquil and checked into the Villa de Maria hostel, which was basically this humble little family-run homestay near the airport. And at that point, all I could really do was collapse into bed and just pray to God that I would be well enough to get onto the flight the next morning. Guayaquil is the largest city in Ecuador. It is not the capital, that's Quito, which is a large city up in the Andes at fairly high altitude. However, Guayaquil is like the big commercial port in Ecuador, and it's also one of the major gateways into and out of the country for many tourists. Because of its size and strategic importance with the port there, it's also become the target of a lot of cartel-related violence over the past few years. Now, normally I'm the kind of person that goes to sort of far-off places. Take Pakistan, for example. I've written a book about it, and people ask me, they're like, oh my God, is it safe? And, you know, my answer to that is normally pretty much yes, don't believe what you see on the media. And that seems to be a theme with a lot of places that I go to. However, Guayaquil did feel a little bit different. Now, I can't speak to exactly how safe or dangerous the city actually is because I only just passed through it very briefly. However, I did have my short visit there and a few interactions with locals to, you know, get like, I guess, a window on what Guayaquil is like. And when I got in the taxi from the bus station over to the Airbnb, I asked the driver, I was like, you know, is Guayaquil safe? And he just flat out said no. The next morning when I was taking the taxi to Guayaquil airport, I asked the same question to my Uber driver there, and he said exactly the same thing. He was just like, no, this city is not safe. Every day there is at least some kind of killing or explosion or incident of gang violence or something. It is actually a rather dangerous city. However, it's also a major air hub, and flights to the Galapagos Islands tend to leave quite early, so it's not impossible that you would find yourself traveling through Guayaquil. An Ecuadorian contact of mine back in Australia had actually told me about this and had said that if you're staying in like a decent hotel near the airport and it's just overnight, then that kind of thing in Guayaquil's not really an issue. The issue comes more if you just go wandering around the city streets on your own, and whether you would be targeted or just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Day or night, Guayaquil is not a place to just go wandering aimlessly. So I got to Guayaquil airport that morning. When I got there, it was being guarded by soldiers, which speaks to the situation in Guayaquil at the time. And then I began the check-in process for my flight to the Galapagos Islands. Now, if you're liking what you're seeing and if you're enjoying all these safety tips about travel in Latin America, please consider giving this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and consider sharing it across social media. And if you really like what you're seeing, please consider telling your family and friends about my channel and my work here. It really helps me grow this YouTube channel. Now, it is time to check in for the flight to the Galapagos Islands, and this is where the adventure really begins, because checking into a flight to the Galapagos Islands is not like checking into just any other domestic flight in South America. Yes, the Galapagos Islands are part of Ecuador. However, the entire archipelago is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most ecologically sensitive places on Earth. And because of that, there are very strict controls on what and who can enter the Galapagos Islands. Checking into into a flight to the Galapagos Islands feels more like checking into an international flight, but with even more restrictions on top of it. So even before boarding the plane, you get the sense that this is going to be something really special. The Galapagos Islands, it's not sort of just like a regular island destination, but the whole place is treated like a living museum, or like, you're going to be living in a zoo for about 5 days. Next to the check-in desks, there's a migration control counter where you need to purchase something called a transit control card. It's not immigration exactly, because you're still traveling domestically within Ecuador, but it functions almost like a permit system for entering the islands. At the time that I was there, it cost $20 and you need it to check in for your flight to the Galapagos Islands. Then, after that, you move down to another inspection counter where all luggage bound for the Galapagos is screened carefully. This is because the islands are so ecologically sensitive. They're trying to prevent any foreign plants, seeds, insects, fresh foods, or organic material from accidentally being introduced to the environment there. Once your bag has been inspected and cleared, it's sealed with this tag and you are then allowed to proceed to check in. Only with your bag sealed and with the transit card that you have purchased are you allowed to even check into the flight. Several airlines operate flights to the Galapagos Islands. There's Avianca, the Colombian airline, which also has an Ecuadorian operation, and there's LATAM Airlines as well, which similarly operates flights within Ecuador. Now, to talk about the Galapagos themselves, and Galapagos isn't just one big island. It's actually an entire archipelago made up of multiple islands, and yes, you can fly into more than one of them. The main airport that most travelers use is on Baltra Island, which is a smaller island that serves as a gateway to the most visited island in the Galapagos, Santa Cruz Island, or Isla Santa Cruz. The airport itself is sometimes referred to as Seymour Airport, after the village near the airport on Baltra. The other major island with commercial flights is San Cristobal Island, which also has its own airport. And if your budget extends to it, then a popular way of doing things is to fly into Baltra and to fly out of San Cristobal and take a cruise or like a, ocean tour or something like this between the two islands, and maybe you can visit some other islands on the way. However, I was doing things on a fairly tight budget and I knew that I would be basing myself mostly on Isla Santa Cruz, so I decided to book flights into and out of Baltra. And let me be very clear about this, the Galapagos Islands are not a cheap place to visit. I think a bit of advice that I would give someone going to the Galapagos Islands is you need to be really clear with yourself about what you're hoping to achieve by going there. If you want to just see a couple of turtles on the side of the road and that would be enough for you, then that's great and you can do that. But the moment you start wanting to get out onto the ocean or taking tours to other sort of more remote islands or even more remote parts of the island that you're staying on, then the costs actually begin to add up significantly. I'd been traveling on a budget around Latin America of roughly $50 American a day. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but you'll see that I exceeded the budget, but with that kind of budget in mind, you'll see the kind of trip that I had there. The last thing I did before I left Guayaquil airport was change my Bolivianos, which I'd been carrying since I left Copacabana weeks earlier. An airport like Guayaquil, the largest and busiest in Ecuador, had a money exchange service where I was finally able to convert them into US dollars. That's right, American dollars, because US dollars is in fact the official currency of Ecuador. After monetary and financial problems many years ago, the original currency of Ecuador, the Ecuadorian sucre, was phased out in favor of the US dollar, which it was hoped would bring more economic stability to the country. With that done, I boarded the flight and soon we were climbing out over the sprawling city of Guayaquil, a city that one day I would really love to come back and explore properly and safely. The flight out to the Galapagos took a couple of hours across the vast Pacific Ocean. During the flight, the crew handed out additional landing forms that all passengers needed to complete, and then the cabin was sprayed with a biological disinfectant to prevent any microorganisms or insects from accidentally making their way onto the islands. That gives you some idea of just how carefully Ecuador protects this ecosystem. Very soon, we were on descent to the Galapagos Islands. Now, I don't know what image you have in your mind of the Galapagos Islands up to this point, but if it's one of lush tropical rainforests and golden beaches and that kind of thing, you're not alone, but you might be surprised at what you're about to see out of my aeroplane window. Take a look at this. As we came into land, the islands looked rugged and windswept, volcanic, almost barren in places. Low scrubland, rocky coastlines, and dark lava fields. It kind of reminded me of like a remote Scottish island, or maybe even somewhere in Iceland, but instead with tropical temperatures. And that's the thing that you need to know about the Galapagos Islands before you plan a trip here. This is not some typical tropical ideal. You come here for the geology, the geography, the flora, the fauna, the isolation. You come here for all of that. It is one of the strangest and most isolated places on Earth, but a tropical beach resort, it is not. It's precisely because these islands are so isolated and so harsh that it became one of the world's great natural laboratories, the place that famously helped inspire Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. After landing, we disembarked into the environmentally friendly airport terminal on Baltra Island, and then immediately had to pay the Galapagos National Park entry fee, which for foreign visitors was a hefty $200. So again, you can do the Galapagos Islands on a budget. Certain things are very affordable. Accommodation, you can take yourself to the beach, you can wander around the islands. Food and drink on the islands is not super expensive, but the moment that you start doing things like trying to get between islands, or even just entering a national park, which by the way is the entire archipelago, then the costs start to stack up. Once through the airport, we boarded a shuttle bus that crossed the short distance down Baltra Island towards the ferry terminal. And like I said, this place just feels like a huge adventure because we've just landed in the Galapagos Islands, but you're not truly there yet. We're having to take a bus to a ferry port which will take us on to the next island. Most people stay on Isla Santa Cruz, but you land on Baltra and there's no bridge from Baltra across to Isla Santa Cruz, so you need to get off the bus, get onto a ferry. It takes you across a very narrow channel and then over onto Isla Santa Cruz. And while I was there between the bus and the ferry, that's where I saw one of these yellow land iguanas just sitting there by the side of the road. Spiky, almost prehistoric looking, completely still in the heat. But you know what's really amazing about this is that Isla Santa Cruz, we had to take a ferry across to that, right? That's only probably 100 or 200 meters across the channel. However, these yellow land iguanas, they don't live anywhere other than Baltra Island. They don't even live on Isla Santa Cruz, and that's why a bridge hasn't been built between the two islands, because the authorities are worried that doing so might upset the ecosystem on either island. Baltra and Isla Santa Cruz are actually really, really close. I mean, you feel like you can reach out and touch Isla Santa Cruz from the southern shore of Baltra, but ecologically they could be on different planets. So we were all there, backpackers, retirees, photographers, scientists, wealthy cruise passengers, all piling onto this little ferry boat together, crossing over these incredibly protected waters into Isla Santa Cruz. And it felt like being on the beginning of an expedition. Like we were heading off into some remote frontier at the edge of the world. On the other side, I disembarked the ferry and then boarded a bus which would take me across Isla Santa Cruz to Puerto Ayora, the largest town in the Galapagos Islands, and the place that would become my home for the next few days as I explored this extraordinary archipelago on a backpacker budget. I checked into the Hostel Gardner, which was very budget friendly, and was given this huge spacious dorm room with several beds spread across it. But at least for that night, I was the only one in the room and I had the bed by the window. The only thing I would say about this place is that there was a bit of a cockroach problem, and I know you come to the Galapagos Islands for the wildlife, but I don't necessarily need it that close. By this point, I felt pretty exhausted. I mean, I had been on the go since Cuenca, and that had not been a good start to this leg of the journey. And so once I hit the bed, I remember just thinking, I have made it. Like, now I can sit here and I can just be for a while. I had booked myself in for 5 days on the Galapagos Islands, and I remember just thinking, like, really? This is going to be the perfect place to convalesce. So that first afternoon, I wandered down towards the waterfront in Puerto Ayora, and immediately you start seeing things that just don't feel real. There was this enormous pelican sitting beside the wharf. And when I say enormous, I mean it was terrifying. It looked prehistoric. Massive beak, huge wingspan, and it was just sitting there staring out over the harbor like it owned the place. Then, a little further along, there were 2 sea lions sprawled out asleep on the pier in the middle of the day, completely unfazed by people walking around them. And that's where the Galapagos really feels like otherworldly, because it's tropical, but it's not sort of like a tropical beach destination. It feels like volcanic and barren, but scrubby at the same time. it feels super isolated, and then you're just surrounded by wildlife even in the center of town. That evening, after going back to the hostel for a bit of a rest, I wandered back out for a bite to eat for dinner and to see what else was happening in the town at night. While I was wandering around the pier again, I looked down into the water and spotted this, gliding just beneath the dock lights. While I was wandering down there at the pier, there were lots of people around, and a young, I think it was Protestant missionary, approached me and asked if he could pray for me. Now, I'm not normally one to be too inclined towards missionaries, but at that point, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, drugged up to my eyeballs on antibiotics and recovering from both a chest infection and some kind of weird stomach bug, I just sort of thought, yeah, alright. The next morning, walking through Puerto Ayora again, I started to really appreciate even more just how bizarre and how unique this place is. Walking through the town center, there were all these bizarre cactus-like trees growing through the town, a species that apparently only exists here in the Galapagos Islands. Then, along the rocks near the waterfront, were these bright red Sally Lightfoot crabs clinging to the volcanic stone. While black marine iguanas lounged nearby like tiny dinosaurs warming themselves in the sun. And all this is just happening in the middle of a town. It's not even really like a tourist town. I mean, there are lots of visitors there, and obviously that's like the main source of income, but it's not really a resort. It feels like it has a really lived-in vibe. And then you're walking around and the whole thing's just like a menagerie.
I think for a lot of people it would be quite shocking to see the amount of development here, because I think when they think of the Galapagos Islands, they don't think that there would be a city like this here. However, I mean, the point is that even here, it's not really a city, it's more of a town. And even here, right here in the middle of the town, there are sea lions just hanging out in the middle of the road like this.
There were sea lions swimming around the boats in the harbour, rubbing themselves against the hulls. At one point, I spotted this huge stingray or manta ray of some kind, gliding silently through the water beneath the pier. And you know, the weirdest thing about it isn't just that these species are all there and that they exist, but it's also just how they're cohabitating with humans all around them as well. I mean, it's marvelously weird. However, I wasn't in the Galapagos Islands to just walk around the town centre, and so I decided to take a stroll out of the town and back along the road that would take me back into the centre of Isla Santa Cruz. Walking inland along the main road through Santa Cruz, I started noticing even more wildlife, strange white birds stalking through the undergrowth, marine iguanas crossing the road. And then one of the most famous animals in the world, the giant Galapagos tortoise, just walked out in front of me.
So I was literally just walking along here and I saw this.
The Galapagos giant tortoises are among the largest tortoises on Earth, with some weighing over 400 kilograms and living well beyond 100 years. Different islands in the archipelago have their own different tortoise species and shell shapes, depending on the environment they lived in, which became one of the observations that helped inspire Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Seeing them wandering slowly through the highlands of Santa Cruz honestly felt like stepping back into another geological era. Beyond that, I walked all the way up to one of the ancient lava flows that is one of the free tourist attractions in the center of Isla Santa Cruz. It was interesting, but I can't deny that for me, my day had been made by just seeing one of those giant tortoises just wandering around the side of the road by itself. And this is where you are able to do the Galapagos on a budget if you're happy with what you're going to see with that money. Yes, you have to pay $200 to enter the national park, but then you are, of course, in a national park. The wildlife is just there. You don't necessarily need to pay for an expensive cruise or luxury safari experience to have these incredible encounters. For some people, I think coming all the way to the Galapagos and not spending money to go out and see particular species of birds or fish life or even other tortoises that might live on other islands, I think for them, it would be like, why did you even come to the Galapagos Islands? But for me, I certainly felt like I got my money's worth. I mean, the $200 entry fee to the national park is steep, but I spread that cost out over the 5 days that I was there. And in addition to the flight cost, I still think that it was worth it because I got to see such marvelous things like this. That evening, I walked back down to Puerto Ayora and got back to the hostel, and I was pretty happy with the day that I'd had. And then I discovered that I had a roommate, and this roommate had decided that the entire room sort of just belonged to him, and he basically just occupied the entire place. I won't tell you where he was from, but I've dropped enough hints in that description just now to give you a pretty good idea. The next morning I woke up and headed out again on foot to Tortuga Bay. Tortuga Bay is this beautiful stretch of white sand beach just around the headland from Puerto Ayora, and getting there is part of the experience. You reach it via this beautiful walking trail that cuts straight through the dry scrubland of Santa Cruz Island, and because you're now properly outside the town, it's also a fantastic place for bird watching. Along the way, I spotted another giant tortoise just casually wandering through the scrub beside the path, which honestly is something that I just don't think I'll ever get used to saying. Eventually, the trail opens out onto this long, perfectly straight stretch that drops you down onto Tortuga Bay itself, and it's stunning. This huge expanse of brilliant white sand, dark volcanic rock, turquoise water, but also incredibly isolated and wild feeling, and the sea here was rough. Again, this is not some tropical lagoon out there. I mean, the Galapagos Islands is an outcrop in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so, you know, the seas there can be pretty rough. Out here, you really feel the power of the Pacific. There's something really raw and untamed about it. But at the same time, there's life everywhere. Little birds stalking along the shoreline, marine iguanas stretched out across the rocks, pelicans diving into the surf. I walked all the way along Tortuga Bay and then around the headland towards the quieter bay on the other side. You walk through this forest of giant cacti, and eventually you arrive at this calmer little inlet surrounded by mangroves. And just as I got there, this sea lion was absolutely putting on a performance for everyone, rolling around in the shallows, diving, splashing, basking in the sun like it knew that it had an audience. I had rented some snorkeling gear, and with a DJI Mimo that I had been given for my birthday by some friends in Melbourne, I set about snorkeling around this part of the bay. I'd been told that there are some reef sharks that sometimes swim through this area, so I thought that I'd see if I could spot any while snorkeling. Unfortunately, the water was pretty choppy that day and visibility wasn't great, and so I didn't get to see any. After a day at the beach, I made my way back across Tortuga Bay, back along the boardwalk and back towards Puerto Ayora, passing all of these birds one more time on the way back. Once I got back into town, I encountered another problem, and that was money. I was trying to get some money out from an ATM in Puerto Ayora. There are only about 3 or 4 ATMs on the entire island, and all of them are here in the center of the town. And I had tried all 4 of them several times, and each time it had failed. So I started to panic. I could still use my card to buy things, but I didn't have any cash on me, and you do need cash out here on the Galapagos Islands. So I figured that the only way that I'd be able to get cash to myself was to wire it to myself on Western Union. It's sort of a bit of a messy and rather expensive way of getting the cash to yourself. However, I needed to get it somehow, so that's what I did. With a bit of that cash, I went to a small store on the next street over and I bought a small turtle charm for my charm bracelet, which would be my memento from Ecuador. I was a bit miffed that I wasn't able to use my debit card to withdraw cash on the island, but compared to what was about to happen, this was nothing. The next morning was day 4 in the Galapagos Islands, and I let myself have a bit of a sleep in before heading out immediately for brunch, where I had an encebollado, which is a famous onion and fish soup from Guayaquil. So I didn't get to experience the city of Guayaquil properly, but I was at least getting to experience some of its cuisine. After that, I headed out to the Charles Darwin Research Station. This is really the heart of conservation in the Galapagos. It's where a lot of the iconic wildlife is studied, protected and bred, especially the giant tortoises. And walking around the station, you start to understand what makes this place so extraordinary. There's scrubland all around, lizards everywhere you look, and then eventually you reach the tortoise enclosures. You can see the baby tortoises being raised in protected conditions right through to the larger adults, some of which are part of carefully managed breeding programs. But even that has its own kind of intensity when you see territorial behavior play out in slow motion. At one point, they also showed us a preserved specimen that really drives home the fragility of the ecosystem here. Lonesome George, the last known individual of the Pinta Island tortoise. He became a global symbol of extinction, conservation, and what's been lost, and what might still be saved. Standing there, it's hard not to feel the weight of that. You're even allowed to see and handle parts of tortoise shells and bones, which makes it all feel strangely intimate, like you're physically touching deep natural history. After that, I headed down to one of the coastal points near Puerto Ayora and went snorkeling. I saw plenty of fish and the water was warm and calm, exactly what I needed at that point. I felt like I had almost fully recovered from everything that had hit me back in Cuenca. Maybe a slight tightness in the chest, but otherwise I was back. The next morning I woke up early. I took a taxi back towards the Puerto Ayora bus station, from where I caught a bus back across Isla Santa Cruz and then jumped on the next ferry heading over to Baltra. While I was disembarking at Baltra Island, I spotted one of the yellow land iguanas on the way again before taking the short bus ride back up towards the airport. From there I flew onwards to Quito via Guayaquil. There are occasional direct flights from the Galapagos Islands, either Baltra Island or Isla San Cristobal, direct to Quito. However, the majority of them stop to refuel in Guayaquil. And all I can say is that the Galapagos Islands absolutely delivered. I may not have visited with the greatest budget there. However, I certainly saw more than what I thought that I would see on the tight budget that I had. Like the sense of being out there surrounded by these prehistoric animals in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, plus having bragging rights of having visited the Galapagos Islands. I mean, that really is one of the highlights of my trip. On top of that, it was the bodily reset that I really needed after Cuenca, so in the end, it all paid off. Next, I would be flying on to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, and to see more about that, make sure that you tune in again next time to the next episode of Latin America Diaries, where my credit card issues will not be finished, in fact will creep up on me again and end to the story in a way that I was absolutely not expecting. Make sure that you like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then.